Toward the end of 2025, there was a trend on TikTok where readers shared their 10 before the end. 10 books they wanted to read before the year closed out. This was my list, which is already ambitious because I never set TBRs. At the time, I had no idea which of these would become 5-star favorites, which would let me down, or which I would never open. But I do now. So today, I'm revisiting my 10 before the end and seeing how it actually played out book by book. Let's get into it. I was so happy we got this book. Mate is the sequel to Ali Hazelwood's Bride, which was actually my first Hazelwood novel, and one I ended up loving more than I expected. Bride very clearly set up the possibility of a sequel, but it hadn't been announced, and with Ali Hazelwood releasing what feels like 20 books a year, I honestly didn't expect this one so soon. But maybe I should have. When I saw Mate was coming out, I was immediately in the Libby line, and I'm happy to say expectations were met. Mate follows Serena Paris, who is Misery's best friend from Bride. Serena is revealed to be the first human were hybrid in this world, and her existence has massive political implications. So instead of becoming a political symbol of unity between species, she actually becomes a target, caught in a power struggle between wares, vampires, and humans. Her only real option for survival is to claim protection under Kuang, who is an alpha. Oh no. This is complicated by the fact that, minor Bride spoiler, Kuang realizes at the end of the first book that Serena is his mate. He doesn't act on it, he doesn't push it, but he's determined to keep her safe at all costs. Dun dun dun! As Serena navigates her new identity, we uncover layers of her past she didn't even know existed, while tensions rise both externally and between her and Kuang. This book is first and foremost a romance, and it knows it. The plot outside of the romance is solid and well developed, but it's clearly in service of Serena and Kuang's relationship. Watching Serena adjust to werewolf culture while Kuang remains emotionally locked down and frustratingly secretive creates a lot of believable tension. Serena is open, curious, and willing to connect, which are qualities that brought her and Misery together. But Kuang is not. He is the exact opposite of open and willing to connect, which would be closed and unwilling to connect, some might say. But Serena is persistent, and eventually he does let her in. When he thaws emotionally, it feels earned for both us as the reader and for Serena, so it's very satisfying. Their dynamic is tender, and they are pretty compatible once they move past the idea of a forced mate bond. They choose each other, and the way that it's written makes the choice matter. Fair warning, this book is spicier than Bride. If Bride surprised you because of the Omega verse of it all, Mate absolutely commits. There's a lot of tension, even though it's not acted on for the majority of the book, but when they do act on said tension, they commit. Okay? That's your warning. Overall, I'd say this was a fun little escapism read. I appreciate that Ali Hazelwood leans into romance, but is committed to giving us pretty complex and fleshed out characters. The banter and just the way that she writes is very quick and witty and distinctive, and I just know that I'm gonna have a good time whenever I pick up one of her books. This is also the last Ali Hazelwood book I read in 2025, so I am still averaging one of her books per wrap-up for those who are keeping track at home this year. Okay, on to the next. East of Eden is one of those books that's constantly pitched as the American classic, the greatest novel of all time, a must-read before you die kind of book. Going in, I was skeptical of that level of hype. Coming out of it, I completely understand. I gave this book 5 stars when I finished. I genuinely felt that I had read something singular, something I'm not sure can ever be replicated in quite the same way. Set in the Salinas Valley in California, East of Eden follows the intertwined histories of 2 families, the Trasks and the Hamiltons. The novel spans multiple generations, tracing patterns of love, betrayal, and resentment as these families repeatedly reenact conflicts rooted in the biblical stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Steinbeck uses this generational framework to explore how familial traits and wounds are passed down over time. The book moves through decades of American history, touching on family loyalty, moral responsibility, immigration, industrialization, the list goes on. And I would say it's a very character-driven story. The characters take the story to places you wouldn't expect, and to places you would expect, because again, it's a study on cycles. This is a 600-page drama in the truest sense of the word, high emotion, sweeping conflicts, and unforgettable character arcs. I honestly think drama is an underused genre label in literature because that's exactly what this is. It reminded me of the long-running soap operas I grew up watching with my grandmother. The highest highs and the lowest lows, and so messy and impossible not to tune in when every new episode aired. Hispanic and Latino homies, sound off in the comments. Did you watch any Mexican soap operas with your grandmother on Univision? If so, which one was your favorite? For me, it was anything with Lucero, and I also really liked Rebelde. I might have been too young to watch these, but I did regardless. There are scenes and characters that still live rent-free in my mind. One character in particular is introduced as a monster. She's described as non-human, and watching Steinbeck complicate that image made me constantly question whether I was reading an extended metaphor, social critique, or something bordering on magical realism. I think I landed on it being an extended metaphor for a bigger theme of what it means to be human. And there was also a scene between two characters. One of them is a child of immigrants and the other one is an immigrant himself, and they're both having a conversation as to what it's like being an immigrant in the United States in terms of identity, and how because of the way that you look, people expect you to act a certain way. So there was this one line that I remember reading it and just, where's the book? I have the book here somewhere. I have this scene tabbed because of how much I liked it. Okay, let's see. It's hard to split a man down the middle and always reach for the same half. Just talking about how when you are juggling the identities of being from somewhere else but also trying to fit into American culture, you know, you feel like you're split down the middle. Sometimes you're going to reach in and the half that you didn't want to pull out is going to come through. And I think that that is it's a fabulous quote to encapsulate that feeling. And the fact that this was written like 70 years ago and it still rings so true. I've never had an original experience in my life. So yeah, I think everybody can reach into this book and take away something different. What hit me the hardest though was this novel's meditation on humanity and choice. East of Eden argues that people are capable of great cruelty, but also that they're never doomed to it. Evil isn't a destiny, it's a choice that we make. And that idea paired with the exploration of general trauma makes the novel feel both timeless and very, very current, which is probably what timeless means. But reading it felt current. Right? Okay. This book was actually gifted to me by the author herself, Tracy Conte, in exchange for a review. This is The Seed, the first book in her Paradox Academy series, and also her debut novel, if I'm not mistaken. This is a coming-of-age story that follows Julia Stockham. When Julia is found on the roof of her middle school on the last day of 8th grade, her parents send her to Paradox Academy, a secluded boarding school in the mountains. Julia is very guarded and reluctant to form new connections, and keeps herself anchored to her past by writing letters to her best friend, Michelle. At Paradox, Julia is assigned a relentlessly kind big named Tracy, whose mission seems to be to overwhelm Julia with love and care, something she has never experienced. Now, this book gets its name from the freshman project each student has to complete. They are given a seed designed to reflect their inner self. As the seeds grow, they reveal truths about the students who tend them. Some bloom easily, and others reveal more complicated inner lives. Julia's seed, however, refuses to sprout at all. As she watches her peers grow closer, she begins to worry that she's fundamentally unable to change, and that if people knew the truth about what led her to Paradox, they might treat her differently. This is a gentle, heartfelt novel centered on love, self-acceptance, and emotional growth. The found family element is especially strong, and I appreciate how the story highlights the impact of growing up around people with different backgrounds and experiences. There's young love, budding friendships, and that tender in-between space of early adolescence where everything feels overwhelming but kind of exciting. While the story is fairly straightforward, it's clearly written with care and empathy. I can see a lot of potential here for the next few books to cover Julia and her friends' journeys through Paradox. I'd recommend The Seed to any young readers in my life, although I have none of those, so I'd say I'd recommend them to any of the young readers in your life. It's a very affirming coming-of-age story that isn't afraid to tackle some more complex topics. Piranesi has been on my radar for a long time, partly because of how passionate people are when they talk about it. And when I mentioned that it was on my TBR over on TikTok, I made a post about it. I got a few comments where people said that it is their all-time favorite book. So I went into it with pretty high expectations. And honestly, I get why. While I didn't love every single choice that was made in this book, it was beautifully written and very atmospheric and deserves all the praise that it gets, I would say. Piranesi is a magical realism literary mystery with loose inspiration from Greek mythology. The story unfolds entirely through journal entries written by the narrator, Piranesi, who lives in a vast labyrinthian house with endless halls, statues, stairways, fish, weather patterns. We get a lot of detail about all those things. The journal entry format makes it feel both academic and kind of forensic, like you're sifting through evidence after the fact. There's one other primary character known as the Other, and through Piranesi's meticulous observations, we begin to piece together the rules of this strange world. The structure is repetitive, I think by design. We hear about the same statues, the same vestibules, the same rhythms of survival over and over again, but that repetition becomes a tool in a really interesting way. It trained me to notice when something breaks the pattern, which kind of symboled that something was wrong. Nothing should be changing because nobody else should be there besides Piranesi and the Other. And the Other doesn't like to explore the house. So what really fascinated me was Piranesi himself. He is very unaware, almost comically so, of the danger that he's in. As a reader, you can see the manipulation happening long before he can, which creates a constant sense of dread. Now, my one critique comes with the reveal. Without spoiling anything, the explanation towards the end felt a little too clean for me. It put a face and a reason to the mystery in a way that slightly diluted the magic for me. I usually prefer a little ambiguity, and while the resolution is creative and thematically really rich, touching on academia, complicity, power, and justice, it didn't hit as hard for me as the buildup kind of promised. That said, this is a small critique on an otherwise excellent book. I would absolutely reread Piranesi, and I think it's the kind of story that gets better the second time once you can trace all the clues backwards. I recommend it very much. Worth the hype and worth the experience. I went into The Strength of the Few with my expectations on the floor, and that's not because I disliked the first book. Quite the opposite. The Will of the Many ends in one of the most insane cliffhangers I've ever read. Top 5 easily. It was so big that I genuinely didn't see how a sequel could possibly carry that weight without collapsing under it. Somehow, this book exceeded. I just exceeded. The Strength of the Few is the second book in James Islington's Hierarchy series. For spoiler reasons, this is a series I strongly recommend to go into as blind as possible, so I'm not going to get specific about the plot events here. What I can say is that this book expands the world, the stakes, and the consequences set up in book 1 in ways that feel very deliberate and very earned. If you're wondering whether the sequel maintains momentum after the cliffhanger, the answer is a capital YES, yes. This book completely cemented my trust in James Islington as a storyteller. Even if I'd gone in with sky-high expectations, this would have surpassed it. The reveals are devastating in the best way, and the emotional beats land exactly where they need to. When I finished the book, I had that rare specific thought that I will never get to read this for the first time again. And that's honestly why I read. Reading is such an individual and immersive experience. You spend hours inside of someone else's world, holding your breath during action scenes, dreading the page turn because you know the shoe is about to drop. The amount of times that I've had to cover the next page I'm reading so that I don't accidentally glance over and spoil it for myself, especially during this book. Yeah, I spoiled one thing for myself and I was actually really upset, but whatever, it is what it is. The series is confirmed to be 4 books, with book 3 slated for 2027. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, after Strength of the Few, I fully trust where this is going. This isn't just a strong sequel, it's a testament to the author's skill. So yes, read the series, please, so I can talk to someone else about it. Redwall by Brian Jacques was a total wild card for me. I'd never heard of the series, and then my husband and I were at Barnes & Noble one day and he picked it up at the fantasy section and the cover fully enticed him. That called to him, spoke to him, said, "This is everything you want in a book and more." And he really loved it. He gave this book 5 stars. We recommend one book to each other every year, and this was his pick for me in 2025. So I went in pretty curious. Redwall is the first book in a sprawling fantasy series. There are over 20 books in this series, and it's set in and around Redwall Abbey, which is a peaceful community for mice and friends. Yes, this book is primarily woodland creatures. It is a fantasy with woodland creatures as the characters. So yeah, their peaceful life is disturbed and threatened when Clooney the Scourge, a ruthless rat warlord, arrives with his horde intent on conquering the abbey. What follows is a classic good versus evil story. The mice of Redwall, along with their woodland allies, badgers, otters, hares, owls, and more, they must find a courage they didn't know they had to defend their home. The world is cozy and whimsical and densely populated with characters, each with distinct personalities that make the whole world feel very alive. This is very much a young adult, middle grade novel, and I think it would hit the most when read at the right age. Reading it as an adult, though, it did feel very young. Initially, that made it harder for me to fully sink into the story. When I mentioned this to my husband, he asked, "Where's your whimsy?" And that honestly did reframe the whole experience for me. This book isn't trying to be subtle or complex. It's trying to be earnest, adventurous, and fun. And I can easily see this being read aloud in like a classroom. I don't know if you had this in elementary school, but my teachers would pick a chapter book to read with us, and we would sit down on this huge rug in the classroom and read a short book or a few chapters of a longer book. That's how we read Geronimo Stilton books and Junie B. Jones and the Shel Silverstein books. One of my core memories was when we would get to cliffhangers in these books and the whole class would be begging for one more chapter. And sometimes the teacher would be like, "No, those are our 2 chapters for the day. See you tomorrow." Other times they'd cave and just give us another chapter, and those were the best days. Okay, so to wrap this up, although I didn't connect with the heroic mice who had so much plot armor, I loved the villains. Clooney the Scourge is very evil and very dramatic and actually a huge coward, so that made him a really fun antagonist. And there's this other character who is a snake, and they're so menacing and mysterious. They get alluded to throughout the story here and there, and towards the end when we get this big scene, it's really fun and action-packed and worth the payoff of alluding to this mysterious character for multiple pages. So I enjoyed Redwall for what it is. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to adults without nostalgia for the series, but I absolutely see why it's beloved and why it would be magical for younger readers discovering it for the first time.
So those were the only books Maria read off of her carefully curated 10 before the end. Unfortunately, Maria is a mood reader, so the next 4 books are complete wildcards. Hold on to your pants. It's about to get crazy.
What a twisty, topsy-turvy good time this book was. The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins is one of those thrillers you've probably heard of, even if only because of the movie, but I finally got around to the book first. I went in knowing exactly 2 things: that there would be a girl and that there would be a train. And we did get that. We got a little more too, obviously. The story follows Rachel, an unreliable narrator who takes the same commuter train every morning. The train stops at the same signal each day, giving her a repeated view into a quiet suburban neighborhood. From the window, she watches a couple she has nicknamed Jess and Jason, projecting a perfect life onto them and filling in the gaps with her imagination. Rachel becomes emotionally invested in these strangers, using them as an escape from her unraveling life. Then one day she sees something shocking, something that disrupts this fantasy that she's built up and pulls her into a situation a lot darker than she expected. As the story unfolds, that single moment continues to resurface, raising questions about what Rachel saw, what she remembers, and what actually happened. I had a great time with this book. It checks so many boxes for a satisfying mystery thriller. There's an unreliable main character, layered personal conflicts, plausible red herrings, and reveals that feel earned rather than just there for shock value. The twist genuinely caught me off guard, and the resolution tied things together in a way that felt cohesive and very satisfying. The pacing is one of its biggest strengths. The story moves in short, almost snapshot-like scenes, jumping between mornings, afternoons, and evenings, which gives it a rhythm that reminds me of police interviews or witness statements, like when they're asking witnesses, like, where were you on the morning of this, and where were you on the evening of this? And so yeah, that's kind of the structure that it was following, which I thought was a cool choice. And that structure works especially well given Rachel's alcoholism and memory gaps. Time feels fragmented, slippery, and unreliable, just like she is. It's easy to see why this was adapted into a film so quickly after it was released. I looked it up, and the book came out on January of 2015, and the movie came out on October of 2016. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. The story is cinematic and tightly wound and built around tension that I imagine translates really well onto the screen. I haven't watched the movie yet though, but after reading this, I'm definitely curious to see how it holds up. Man, I really wanted to love this one. I wanted to like Katabasis, especially since I enjoyed R.F. Kuang's work before. So I went in expecting something that would hit the same intellectual and emotional highs as Babel. And while there's a lot to admire here, this one ultimately didn't bring it home for me. In Katabasis, we follow Alice and Peter, who are two elite graduate students studying magic, and they're locked in this academic rivalry, a prison of their own making, I fear. Alice's singular goal is to be the best, number one in her field, and she's sacrificed nearly everything to get there. When their advisor dies in an accident that Alice believes might be her fault, she decides the only solution is to descend into the underworld and bring him back. And so does Peter. Peter goes with her. What follows is a very Dante's Inferno inspired journey through hell, with Alice and Peter navigating a version of the underworld that feels familiar. Bureaucratic and hierarchical, and it like mimics the academic landscape that they both come from. Along the way, the book draws heavily from classical texts and thinkers, think like Homer and Dante, using them as both literal guides and conceptual touchstones. There are things I genuinely enjoyed here. The idea of hell as academia adjacent is pretty tongue-in-cheek and creative. Kuang is undeniably a skilled writer. She's smart, and she knows she's smart, and she writes with the confidence of someone who is smart and knows that they are smart, which I love. I also appreciated how the book explores complex ideas in math, linguistics, and theoretical physics, and applies them to a magic system based on paradoxes and alchemy circles. That was fun and entertaining and educational at some points. I will say that in the moment, I understood the references within the context of the magic system, but once I finished the book, that information evaporated from my brain. There was theoretical physics, and advanced calculus just has no place to stick to up here, to be honest with you. It's just not my reality. Now, that's not where the book lost me. Where it lost me was the pacing. The story constantly expands and contracts. Long stretches of dense explanation followed by moments of real momentum, and those in-between sections during the moments of expansion really lost me. I'm not gonna lie. It kind of dragged a little bit. Yeah. It often felt like the information was there just for the sake of being there, just to be like, yeah, I know these things, I research these things, as opposed to like driving the story forward. Anybody could make an argument to say that, yes, they did drive the story forward, but I always come back to it. It could have been a lot more concise than it was, and I think the story would have been better for it. The ending, though, is strong. Probably one of Kuang's best that I have read so far. Unfortunately, it came too late to fully save the experience for me, so this is sitting quite comfortably at 3 stars, middle of the pack. I still want to read more of R.F. Kuang's work. The Poppy Wars is up on the list of series that I want to get to. I'm interested to see what her writing is like in a much more like cutthroat fantasy setting. The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk, which I'm just gonna call The Fallen because that title is a workout, is the 4th book in Carissa Broadbent's Crowns of Nyaxia series. I talked about the previous installment, The Songbird and the Heart of Stone, in my last wrap-up, so if you're not caught up and want to avoid spoilers, this is your cue to skip ahead, okay? It's very hard to talk about this book without brushing up against big reveals, so that's your warning. Okay, spoilers. This book acts as a convergence point for the entire series so far. Events from The Songbird and the Heart of Stone, which I will now be calling Songbird because, again, a workout. The events from Songbird ripple out and affect all of Obertrace, and the story in The Fallen reflects that scale. We move all across the map, following multiple characters and storylines and gods, lore, and long-running arcs all collide. Every major setting and faction we've encountered across the main books and the novellas feeds into what feels like one massive crescendo in this book. I'm gonna put up the reading order on screen just so it's easier to follow along. But yeah, I skipped Slaying the Vampire Conqueror mostly because I forgot about it, and I regret it. Those characters came into play in The Fallen and will probably be brought up moving forward, so I will be getting to that soon. Overall, I love this book. One of Broadbent's biggest strengths is how well she understands her world. Even as a reader, just passing through, you can feel how well she knows the rules and exactly when and how to break them. That confidence makes twists land, and I trust her to take us somewhere interesting, even when the stakes get really huge. My main critique is pacing. Once again, this book is long, and while I understand why it's long, there are 2 arcs that could have been like trimmed down a little bit without losing impact, and I think again the story would have been stronger for it. I'm trying to be self-aware here when it comes to critiquing pacing, because I'm like, is it a me thing? Is it an attention span thing? And I don't think it is. I think that there are books now that are coming out that either editors are just like not clocking it or what, but I feel like things could be more concise. And I know that can be hard to cut out scenes and moments that feel important and that they could add to the story. But I always think that there's a better way to do it. Like, authors are craftsmen when it comes to shaping and molding words. They should be able to trim down things without impacting the story and being able to make it punchier and being able to show rather than tell. I feel like there's a lot of telling, and on a scale, right? Sometimes it's exposition, you're being told the story, that's fine. But when we're too much on the telling scale, too many words are being used. I feel like, yeah, okay, that's for me in my journal later. I gotta figure out how I really feel about pacing. That said, Misha and Asar absolutely stole the show for me. They're one of my favorite couples I've read, period. Misha's arc centers on self-acceptance, and Asar's unwavering support is everything. There's a scene in this book involving the goddess of fate in this world and Asar, and he asks, or more like demands, to be taken to Misha, and the goddess, who can see every possible outcome of that moment, says the following: billions of threads and not a single one where you say no. As in, not a single one where he doesn't choose Misha. I'm screaming, I'm crying, I'm throwing up, I'm an emotional wreck, I'm on the floor. People are asking me if I'm okay. I say, it's fine, it's not that deep. Scene, okay. Yeah, their relationship and Misha's arc resolution by the end was powerful and affirming and very, very satisfying. I'm ready for the next book, which comes out in August. It's the first book in the Bloodborne duet, so we're gonna get, predictably, that book and one more book, I'm assuming, and maybe probably one more novella. Either way, I'm along for the ride. Last but not least is To Chase the Glowing Hours by Katherine Kirkpatrick. I got this book as a digital arc from NetGalley, so big thank you to Regal House and NetGalley for getting me that arc. All thoughts are my own, as always. I was originally drawn to this book because it had been a long time since I'd read an Egypt and archaeology-centered story. That genre was everywhere when I was younger, and the premise immediately tapped into a sense of nostalgia I was excited to revisit. Set between 1920s London and Egypt, To Chase the Glowing Hours follows Eve, who is the daughter of an archaeologist, and she finds herself pulled into her father's world, one filled with ambition, mystery, and the promise of discovery. As she navigates restrictive social expectations, complicated family dynamics, and a little bit of a love interest, the story leans into familiar genre beats: ancient ruins, intellectual obsession, and the tension between duty and desire. The setting plays a major role here, grounding the story in a time and place closely associated with the golden age of archaeology. Egypt, in particular, is rendered as both alluring and dangerous, reinforcing the romanticized image that often defines this genre in particular. Kirkpatrick's greatest strength is atmosphere. Her descriptions of both London and Egypt are vivid and cinematic, and I never had trouble visualizing where the characters were or what the scene looked like. The novel clearly understands the aesthetic appeal of its setting, and that's where it shines. However, the characters themselves felt a bit constrained to their archetypes. The rebellious daughter, the eccentric academic father, and a charming but suspect love interest, they all behave largely as expected without really evolving beyond these roles. Because of that, they often felt like familiar genre stand-ins and not so much as fully realized people. I will also say that much of the story felt narrated at arm's length and a lot of telling rather than showing. That distance made it harder for me to emotionally connect, even when the stakes were meant to be really high. Overall, I'd recommend To Chase the Glowing Hours to readers who are newer to this genre. While it didn't fully work for me, I can see how the familiar structure and setting might be enjoyable for the right audience. So those were the last 10 books of 2025. For those keeping track, I read 6 of the original 10 I had on my list, which is actually not bad for me given that I usually never have TBRs. The other 4, which I will get to, are Eternal Ruin by Tigges Germa, The Favorites by Lane Fargo, The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, and Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. They're very much still on my radar, and I'll probably get to them this year. I'm gonna try. Last wrap up of 2025, people. That's it. Thank you all for being here. If you followed me in the past year, this has been my first year on BookTube, and I've had a lot of fun. But yeah, that's it for this video. Let's stay connected in this crazy, crazy world. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more bookish people find this channel, and it means the world to me. You can also follow me over on Fable and join my book club if you're nasty. I'll leave the link in the description if you'd like to join. See you in the next one. Happy reading.